The village where Zuri was born sat quietly between red earth paths and low green hills, a place where mornings smelled of wood smoke and evenings carried the sound of distant drums. Life there moved slowly, measured by sunrise, market days, and seasons of rain. Zuri's parents were known as honest, hardworking traders who traveled often to the city, returning with sacks of grain, boats of modern fabric, radios, and small gadgets that fascinated the neighborhood children. Their home was always lively, filled with noise, laughter, and the restless energy of 5 growing children. Zuri was the only daughter, smaller in size but sharp-eyed and curious, always watching, always learning. From an early age, she understood that her world was shaped by her brothers' footsteps, their games, their jokes, and their quiet rules. Her mother loved her deeply, braiding her hair with care and teaching her household skills, while her father encouraged all his children to be brave and independent. There was no cruelty in the house, no deliberate neglect. What shaped Zuri was not rejection, but constant exposure. She was surrounded by masculinity in its raw village form, loud, physical, competitive, and admired. And to a child, admiration is a powerful teacher. Among her brothers, Kelechi stood apart. As the eldest, he carried himself with confidence and authority, his voice firm, his posture straight, his presence commanding. The younger boys followed him instinctively, copying his walk and waiting for his approval. Kelechi believed deeply in strength. To him, strength meant survival, respect, and honor. He trained his brothers in wrestling behind the house, taught them how to climb trees without fear, how to set simple traps, how to carry heavy loads without complaint. Zuri was always nearby, watching from the edge at first, her eyes shining with interest. One day, when one of the boys complained of pain, Zuri stepped forward and tried the same move, falling hard but getting back up without crying. Kelechi laughed, surprised, then impressed. From that moment, he included her, not out of rebellion or ideology, but because she showed grit. That inclusion changed everything. Zuri felt chosen, respected, and seen. She learned to throw herself into rough games, to swallow tears, to laugh at bruises. Each small victory earned her praise, not just from Kelechi but from the boys who now treated her like one of their own. Slowly, the approval she received from acting tough began to outweigh the quiet praise she got for being gentle. Without realizing it, she started associating strength with what? As the years passed, these patterns deepened. Zuri spent less time with the village girls, who gathered to sing, talk, and help their mothers. Their conversations felt distant to her, their laughter unfamiliar. With her brothers, she felt alive. She ran faster, spoke louder, and learned to use sharp words to defend herself. Her clothing changed first by convenience, shorter wraps for running, looser shirts for climbing, then by preference. She admired how the boys walked with confidence, how people stepped aside for them on narrow paths. She copied their posture, their tone, their fearless way of occupying space. Villagers began to notice. Some laughed it off, calling her a tomboy, while others shook their heads and whispered concerns. A few elders gently warned her parents, suggesting that a girl should be guided differently before habits became permanent. Her parents listened politely but dismissed the worry. To them, Zuri was healthy, confident, and happy. They believed that love meant allowing a child to grow freely, without pressure or strict correction. They trusted that nature would balance everything in time. What they did not see was the quiet confusion forming inside Zuri, the way admiration had turned into imitation, and imitation into identity. She did not hate being a girl, but she feared being weak, ignored, or limited. And in her young mind, strength had a clear image. By the time Zuri reached early adolescence, the difference between her and other girls was unmistakable. Her voice carried authority, her gaze met people directly, and she moved through the village without hesitation. Some boys respected her, others felt challenged by her presence, while many adults remained uncertain how to respond. Zuri herself did not yet have words for what she was becoming. She only knew that when she acted like her brothers, she felt safe and valued. When she tried to act otherwise, she felt exposed. At night, she lay awake listening to the familiar sounds of home, unaware that her childhood choices were quietly shaping her future struggles. She still loved her family, still belonged to them fully, but a line had begun to form between who she was and who the village expected her to be. It was a line drawn not by rebellion, but by influence, admiration, and a young heart trying to survive by becoming what it believed was strong. This was the beginning of Zuri's journey, long before shame, before the city, before loss. It began simply, in love, in play, and in the powerful desire to belong. The line that had quietly formed during Zuri's childhood grew sharper as she stepped fully into adolescence. The same village paths she once ran freely now felt narrower, as though the world itself had begun to measure her against expectations she did not understand. Her body changed, but her habits did not. While other girls adjusted their movements, their voices softening as they learned what was expected of them, Zuri held onto the posture and tone she had learned beside her brothers. She walked with certainty, spoke without hesitation, and met the gaze of elders directly. Some admired her confidence, calling her fearless. Others frowned, unsettled by a girl who did not shrink herself. Zuri sensed this shift, though she could not name it. She only knew that approval had become conditional. When she acted strong, she was noticed. When she tried to blend in, she felt invisible. That imbalance quietly pushed her further toward the version of herself that drew respect, even if it confused her heart. As her brothers grew into young men, their responsibilities increased, and Zuri followed closely behind. She helped in physically demanding work, carried loads others her age avoided, and volunteered for tasks usually reserved for boys. In public spaces, especially the market, people often mistook her for a boy from a distance. At first, this brought a strange thrill. Shopkeepers spoke to her directly, using firm tones reserved for men. Strangers stepped aside to let her pass. She felt seen, acknowledged, and protected by the image she presented. Over time, this recognition became addictive. Zuri began to adjust deliberately, binding her chest with tight cloth, lowering her voice, choosing clothes that concealed rather than revealed. These changes were not announced, not even fully conscious. They were practical decisions driven by comfort and safety. Yet with each adjustment, the distance between her inner self and her outward presentation widened. She learned how easily perception could shape treatment, and that lesson stayed with her. At home, silence filled the spaces where conversations should have been. Her parents noticed the stares Zuri drew, the comments whispered when she passed, but they avoided confrontation. They believed guidance would feel like rejection, and rejection was the one thing they never wanted their daughter to experience. Zuri, meanwhile, felt the tension but interpreted it as pressure from the outside world, not from her family. She withdrew from village girls completely, finding their curiosity intrusive and their questions uncomfortable. They asked about marriage, about womanhood, about futures she could not picture herself in. Among boys and men, she felt clear and defined. Strength had rules, weakness had consequences. There was no confusion there. Slowly, Zuri began traveling to neighboring villages with traders and relatives, places where no one knew her history. In those unfamiliar spaces, she presented herself fully as a young man. The freedom was intoxicating. No explanations, no expectations, just movement, walk, and respect. Living two lives demanded careful control. In her village, she remained Zuri, though different. Outside it, she became someone else entirely. She learned how to adjust her walk, when to speak, when to stay silent. Each successful interaction reinforced the belief that this version of herself was safer and more powerful. But the cost was emotional isolation. There was no one she could speak to honestly. Each return home felt heavier, like stepping back into a role she was slowly outgrowing. At night, doubt crept in. She wondered whether she was becoming strong or simply hiding. Yet daylight always pushed those thoughts away. The world responded better to the mask, and so, she wore it more often. The line between choice and habit blurred, until even Zuri could not tell where one ended and the other began. By late adolescence, the village no longer saw her as simply different. She had become a subject of debate. Elders whispered. Mothers pulled their daughters closer when Zuri passed. Some men mocked her openly, while others watched with wary curiosity. Zuri felt the weight of their eyes but met them head-on. Inside, however, tension tightened like a knot. She stood between two worlds, fully belonging to neither. The strength she had built protected her from fear, but not from loneliness. She was admired and criticized in equal measure, yet truly understood by no one. Still, she moved forward, convinced that retreat would mean weakness. What she did not realize was that the very confidence she relied on was drawing attention she could no longer control. The village was watching more closely now, and secrets, no matter how carefully kept, rarely survived the pressure of many eyes. The village had been watching for a long time, and when people watch closely enough, they eventually notice what no one intended to reveal. It happened on a busy market day, the kind that pulled people from neighboring villages, filled the air with dust and shouting, and left no space for anonymity. Zuri had gone early, moving confidently through the crowd, carrying goods for a trader who trusted her strength and reliability. She dressed as she always did when leaving the village, carefully, deliberately, presenting the version of herself that commanded respect. For hours, everything went smoothly. She bargained, lifted heavy loads, spoke briefly and firmly. But life rarely waits for the right moment. A sudden argument broke out nearby, voices rising, bodies pressing together. In the chaos, someone grabbed Zuri's arm too roughly. She pulled back instinctively, and in that struggle, the careful balance she maintained slipped. A piece of cloth shifted. A voice questioned. Eyes lingered. Silence followed. It was the kind of silence that arrives before a storm, thick and full of recognition. What began as confusion turned quickly into noise. Someone laughed, sharp and loud, pointing. Another shouted a question that needed no answer. The crowd circled, curiosity feeding cruelty. Zuri felt heat rush to her face as the truth spread faster than she could speak. Words hit her like stones, mockery disguised as jokes, accusations thrown carelessly, laughter rising where empathy should have stood. A nickname was born in that moment, ugly and humiliating, repeated again and again until it stopped. Each repetition stripped away a piece of her composure. She tried to stand tall, to hold the posture that had protected her for so long, but strength built on concealment collapses quickly when exposed. Her hands shook, her throat tightened. The mask that once gave her power now betrayed her. She fled the market under a rain of laughter, the sound following her like a curse. News travels faster than feet in a village. By the time Zuri reached home, the story had already arrived ahead of her, distorted and exaggerated. Neighbors gathered in clusters, pretending to talk about other things while watching her gate. Her parents' faces changed the moment they saw her. Shock came first, then fear, then a quiet, devastating realization. Inside the house, there were no raised voices, no dramatic accusations. The silence was heavier than anger. Her mother wept softly, not from hatred, but from confusion and grief. Her father sat still, his hands clasped, staring at the floor as though searching for the moment he should have acted and did not. Zuri stood before them, stripped of explanations. Everything she had avoided saying now demanded a voice, but none came. Shame does that, it robs language before it touches the tongue. The days that followed were some of the longest Zuri had ever lived. The nickname spread until it replaced her real name in the mouths of many. Children laughed openly. Adults looked away or stared too long. Every step outside the house felt like punishment. The strength she once carried with pride now felt useless against collective judgment. Her brothers avoided her eyes, torn between loyalty and embarrassment. Kolechi, who had unknowingly shaped her path, said nothing at all. His silence cut deeper than any insult. Zuri realized then that influence does not disappear when consequences arrive, it simply changes form. The family met privately and made a decision they believed was merciful. Zuri would go to the city. Distance, they hoped, would quiet the village and give her space to find clarity. To Zuri, it felt like exile dressed as concern. She left early one morning, before the village fully woke. No farewell gathering, no explanations. Just a small bag and a heavy heart. As she walked away, the familiar paths looked different, as though they no longer recognized her. She did not look back, afraid that if she did, she would collapse. The road to the city stretched long and uncertain, carrying her away from the only home she had ever known. Inside her, everything felt fractured. The identity she had built was broken, but nothing had replaced it yet. What awaited her was unknown, but one thing was certain. The village had taken something from her that day, her sense of control. And in its place, it left a question she could no longer ignore. Who was she, now that the lie had been stripped away? The question followed Zuri into the city, clinging to her like dust on her clothes. The place she arrived in was nothing like the village she had left behind. The air was louder, heavier, filled with engines, shouting vendors, and the constant movement of people who did not look twice at anyone. At first, this anonymity felt like relief. No one knew her name. No one carried her past in their eyes. She rented a small room on the edge of a crowded neighborhood and found work doing hard labor, the kind that demanded strength but offered no belonging. Here, strength was not admired, it was expected. People were valued for what they could produce, not who they were. Zuri quickly realized that the confidence she once carried so easily did not translate the same way in the city. There were too many people, too many versions of strength, too many hidden struggles. The mask she had worn so carefully in the village no longer made her special. It only made her tired. As weeks turned into months, the city pressed in on her from all sides. Zuri drifted between spaces, never fully accepted anywhere. Among men, she was watched watched closely, questioned subtly, tested constantly. Among women, she felt like an outsider who spoke the wrong language. Every interaction demanded calculation. How much to say? How much to hide? Which version of herself to present? The effort drained her. She met people who lived boldly without roots, who rejected tradition entirely, and who encouraged her to do the same. Some offered easy answers, quick identities, and false certainty. For a while, she listened. Confusion often welcomes certainty, even when it is dangerous. But each promise of freedom came with a price: loneliness, instability, and a deeper disconnect from her own reflection. At night, alone in her small room, the noise of the city faded just enough for her thoughts to return. She began to feel split down the middle, pulled between what she had pretended to be and what she no longer recognized. The breaking point did not arrive in a dramatic moment. It crept in slowly, through exhaustion and quiet despair. One evening, after a long day of work, Zuri caught her reflection in a darkened window. For the first time, she did not recognize strength there. She saw tension, fear, and a face shaped by constant defense. The question she had carried since leaving the village finally demanded an answer. Who was she becoming? The city had not freed her. It had only given her more room to lose herself. She understood then that pretending had once protected her, but now it was costing her peace. The realization brought no immediate comfort, only clarity. Lies require energy. Truth, even when painful, allows rest. For the first time in years, Zuri allowed herself to imagine a life without performance. Returning home was not an easy decision. Pride resisted. Fear whispered of judgment and rejection. But beneath those voices was something steadier, a desire to live without hiding. Zuri began saving what little money she could, preparing quietly. When the day came, she packed lightly, as she had before, but this time the weight she carried was different. It was not shame driving her forward, but acceptance of responsibility for her choices. As the city fell away behind her, she felt no triumph, only resolve. She did not know how the village would receive her, or whether forgiveness would come easily. But she knew one thing with certainty: she could no longer survive as a divided person. Whatever awaited her at home, it would be faced as herself, not as a shadow built to survive the expectations of others. Zuri returned to the village quietly, just as she had left it, but everything inside her was different. The familiar paths no longer felt like judgment, they felt like memory. The air carried the same smells, the same sounds, yet she walked more slowly now, no longer armored by performance. When her parents saw her at the gate, time seemed to pause. Her mother froze, disbelief giving way to tears that came without restraint. Her father stood still for a long moment, then stepped forward and pulled her into an embrace that said what words could not. There were no accusations, no rehearsed speeches. Pain had already done its work on all of them. That evening, they sat together and spoke honestly for the first time in years. Zuri did not defend her past or excuse her choices. She spoke of fear, of confusion, of how strength had slowly turned into hiding. Her parents listened, not as judges, but as people who recognized their own silence and distance in her story. Forgiveness did not arrive as a single moment. It unfolded gradually, through shared meals, quiet conversations, and the simple act of staying. The village watched cautiously at first, but familiarity softened suspicion. Zuri began helping openly, no longer trying to prove anything. She learned that humility earns a different kind of respect, slower but deeper. Rebuilding herself took time. Zuri allowed herself to learn what she had avoided before, not because she was forced to, but because she chose to. She discovered that embracing her womanhood did not erase her strength, it reshaped it. The discipline she had learned through hard labor, the confidence forged through endurance, now served her in steadier ways. She became reliable, balanced, and grounded. People began to seek her out, not for shock or curiosity, but for guidance and support. It was during this period of quiet rebuilding that Malik entered her life. He was observant, patient, and unafraid of complexity. He did not ask her to explain herself immediately, nor did he project expectations onto her. Their bond grew through work, shared values, and mutual respect. When Zuri finally told him her story, she expected distance. Instead, she found understanding. Their marriage was not celebrated for spectacle, but for stability. Together, they built a home defined by honesty and effort. Zuri no longer needed to perform strength, it lived naturally in the way she carried responsibility, protected her peace, and nurtured those around her. Years later, Zuri stood firmly within herself, no longer divided by fear or shaped by imitation. The village remembered her story, but it no longer defined her by it. She had become an example, not of perfection, but of growth. She used her experience to guide guide younger people who struggled with belonging, reminding them that admiration without reflection can quietly distort identity. Zuri understood now that strength is not found in denying truth, but in facing it fully. Her life did not erase the past, it redeemed it. The girl who once learned toughness to survive learned wisdom to live. And in that balance, she finally found peace.